Hey, welcome to the Elle Russ Show. My name is Elle Russ, and I am a #1 bestselling author and master coach. My intention is to inspire, educate, and motivate you with weekly content featuring amazing guests and solo episodes. Visit my website, elleruss.com, to learn more about me, my courses, free masterclasses, partner discounts, and much more. Enjoy the show. Mark Sisson, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great, Elle. So good to talk to you. You know, we used to talk a lot back in the old days, back when I lived on the left coast.
That's right.
And now that I don't, we don't talk as much. So I'm looking forward to catching up today.
But I was very excited to see you at the Primal Kitchen mayo spread party, the new mayo, the new sort of like the whip mayo, which was really great. And we'll talk a little bit less about that for people that want to know sort of Mark's trajectory of his businesses and his life, and eventually selling Primal Kitchen Foods to Kraft Heinz. And now he's on to a new endeavor, which we'll talk about, minimalist footwear company Peluva. For those that don't know Mark, go to marksdailyapple.com or primalkitchen.com. You can read about him. There's also thousands of articles he's written over the years on paleo, primal, ancestral health topics. I want to just cover a few things that have come up over the years in the paleo primal community, and see what your thoughts are now about them. Yep. You have a very popular article that you wrote on Mark's Daily Apple many years ago called "Why Grains Are Unhealthy." I guess for the people out there that are wondering or feel like there's a debate, why would someone maybe reconsider eating grains?
Well, I was one of those people that fought desperately for my right to consume grains for the longest time. You know, as a former endurance athlete, who at the time thought that I needed to consume voluminous amounts of carbohydrates throughout the course of a day, like literally 1,000 grams a day of carbs, to fuel the running and the cycling and all the stuff I was doing in my training. And the carb sources, the best carb sources were grain-based. You know, it was cereals and breads and pastas and pies and cakes and candies and cookies, and anything that had some form of grain in it seemed to be a go-to source of carbohydrates, even beer for that matter.
And wasn't that the paradigm of the exercisers? And you were a pro runner back then. Wasn't that the thing, like carb up before the race? We always heard about people eating loads of pasta and stuff. So that was
absolutely
be fueled by glucose type of paradigm.
Yes. Yeah. So all carbs convert to glucose for the most part. I mean, fructose, berries, fruits and things like that, a slight difference there. But most of these things, particularly grains, convert to glucose in the bloodstream. Glucose was, it was thought to be the primary reason that the muscles were able to work as hard as they could over long distances. And glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose, was this reserve of energy that we kept in our muscles and our liver, that it was thought was the determining factor as to who would last the longest in a race. So the concept of carbo loading was intended to refill your glycogen supplies, not just before a race, but every single day before training. I mean, in those days, I trained 100 miles a week on average for about 7 years when I was a runner, and then put in even more time between the bike and running and swimming when I was a triathlete. And so you would literally deplete the glycogen every single day, and you'd have to go back and replenish it. So the idea was, okay, consume as many carbs as you can. You're going to get some protein in there. You're going to get some fat, but focus on the carbs. And that's what I did. And for years and years and years, but I had to retire early. I had osteoarthritis in my feet. I had tendonitis in my hips. I had irritable bowel syndrome that ran my life, that literally dictated pretty much my move every day. Literally, I had to kind of plan around where the nearest bathroom was from the age of 14 to about 47.
What did you think was wrong with you then? Were you just like, this is just me? Because, old-timey doctors were like, whatever.
Yeah. And I have a nervous, I'm a type A and I'm a high stress individual. And I was, and I thought the reason I'm a high stress and I'm a type A is the same mindset that leads me into endurance running, which is, a difficult pursuit. It takes a lot of willpower to be able to focus, to make yourself uncomfortable every single day and not have fun while you're training, and then make yourself even more uncomfortable in a race in the hopes that you'll prevail.
You do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really is. I mean, I could go back and analyze the psychology of myself growing up in a small fishing village in Maine and being kind of a scrawny kid and getting bullied and, having to live literally by my wits. I mean, I was a pretty smart kid, so I was able to get by on my wits. But once I discovered running and I discovered that I was good at it, that became my currency. That became my credibility. So I went from being, the kid who was beaten mercilessly with towels and shit in the locker room in high school to being the high point man on the track team as a freshman in high school, because I would win the mile, the 2 mile, and of all things, sometimes the pole vault. So, the psychology there was, I mean, I've always looked at how I went from being this scrawny kid who was too small to play football, basketball, baseball, hockey, which was big in New England, and into running to becoming an quote Iron Man, right? So what's the psychology behind that? Plus, with the last name Sisson, you can imagine what people would call me once in a while. So, it was, yeah.
I actually never thought about that until now.
Yeah.
But now it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So when you ask why, there's a lot of psychology behind my choices there and why I did stuff. And anyway, so what
sorry,
happened?
segue back to the
No,
grains.
I don't want to get too far off track on the story. I want to keep focused here. But so I was into running. I became a very good runner. I became one of the best in the country. And I finished 5th in the U.S. National Championship Marathon in 1980, went on to finish 4th in the Ironman in Hawaii. And throughout those years, I also did some other, athletic endeavors that were kind of world-class in nature. And yet I had to retire early because of these maladies, these illnesses, these itises, tendonitis, arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, which is an itis, colitis, GERD, upper respiratory tract infections many times a year. And so I went away from the training, but I kept my diet, and I didn't resolve anything. My arthritis continued to kind of hang in there, but since I wasn't running hard anymore, it wasn't of import to me. And I kind of shifted gears and went into looking at how maybe I could become fit without all of the hard work. And as part of this endeavor into looking at how we could be strong and lean, fit, happy, healthy, productive, without so much pain and sacrifice and suffering, at least in the training, I came across a diet that was higher in fats, higher in protein, was lower in carbohydrate. And I adopted that diet, and that became the foundation of the paleo diet and the primal blueprint. But at the time, I was still consuming grains. I was still eating grains because it was just, my assumption was, well, if the government says you have to have 6 to 11 servings of this thing a day, it can't be bad for you. It must be good for you. When I started really doing the deep research, and I started discovering things like phytic acid in grains that bound with minerals and prevented the body from taking in these minerals like calcium and phosphorus and magnesium. When I discovered these tightly wound proteins, gluten, particularly in wheat, but there are other forms in corn and oats and other types of grain. I started, think about, well, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be eating these, but I wasn't at the point yet where I was willing to give up my cinnamon toast, my granola, my French toast, my pancakes, my pasta. And one day, and this was at a time when I was under a lot of stress from some other stuff that was going on in my life. And my wife said, look, you're writing about all this stuff about grains and how negative it is and how antithetical it is to health. And yet you continue to eat grains. Why don't you just stop for 30 days and see what happens?
I just called you out on it right there. Yeah. And
she did. And my wife, and she's pretty vocal about, her opinions. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. And I did. And literally in 30 days, everything in my life transformed. My arthritis started to go away, the pain, the irritable bowel syndrome, that went away, literally forever. This thing that I'd lived with for 30 plus years. My GERD disappeared. It was so transformative to me that I thought to myself, God, if I'm a guy who knows a lot about diet and nutrition, and I'm still defending my right to eat grains, and I wasn't celiac, I didn't test positive for celiac, but there had to be something going on at some some level on a spectrum of, 0 to horrible for the grains. If I'm someone who had fought so desperately for my right to eat grains, I wonder how many tens of millions of people are like me who just assume, well, I'm not celiac and, I don't get bloated immediately after eating pasta, so maybe grains are fine for me. And that really got me down this path of the Primal Blueprint and looking at grains being antithetical to health and certainly unnecessary. Like, we do not need grains at all in our diet. The fact that some of us can consume grains, I guess is fine. But just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean it's good for us. And, grains there's a whole, Jared Diamond wrote a book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, and talked about agriculture being the worst mistake in human history because it allowed us to stay in one place, revert, de-evolve from a hunter-gatherer species into staying in one place and growing crops and storing those crops and being able to have more children. And so having to feed those children with these cheap forms of calories that we could grow and store, i.e. grains. And so grains are kind of responsible for much of what we know as civilization today. But it does not mean that they're a good thing for us. It does not mean that we have evolved guts to be able to digest grains in the way that we can digest animal protein, for instance, or fruits. So that's kind of what got me onto writing that particular seminal blog post way back in the day.
We know the connection now. We see the difference with people with autoimmune disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, all of the stuff. I mean, your story about how the IBS went away in 30 days. Palmer Kippola, who beat MS, talked about when she quit grains and gluten, a week, her stomach stuff resolved. But a month later, all of her MS symptoms disappeared. She hasn't had them since. And she follows that kind of functional paleo diet. We hear so many of these stories. So that's another reason, if you're out there and you have an autoimmune disorder, we know for sure that it really ignites Hashimoto's antibodies, but this is connected with autoimmune disorders. And I think I recall correctly that in CJ Hunt's paleo documentary, The Perfect Human Diet, one of the paleontologists was talking about how they never saw rheumatoid arthritis on the archaeological record until about 10,000 years ago when the grains showed up,
No, there's a lot of that there, whether it's bad teeth, bone defects and deformities, right. Decrease in stature, just in height, of civilizations that before grains had been robust individuals, and now we're sort of smaller and scrawnier and less robust and didn't live as long and had these sort of what we now call diseases of civilization for good reason. But I would say, just to finish that thought, so anybody who has an autoimmune disease and has not tried a 30-day elimination diet, a 30-day experiment under the watchful eye of your physician, is probably leaving a lot of stuff unanswered on the table there. And I think it's well worth anyone who has that amount of pain and is now, living a life that's kind of focused around fixing what's wrong with them, eliminating not just grains, but eliminating, industrial seed oils and things like that. I would, I think Melissa, Urban, with her introduction of the Whole30 was a great kind of starting point for a lot of people.
Can you give a quick snapshot of why seed oils like canola oil, corn oil are detrimental?
Well, first of all, I always look to nature and say, okay, what is it about, what do we find in nature that is quite likely we encountered in some similar form through our evolution, and to which we evolved either the ability to digest it or the ability to assimilate it. Seed oils are not a good source of fats. They're a good source of carbohydrate. Most of these seed oils, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, which is rapeseed oil, an incredible amount of substrate of the source has to be gathered and pressed and converted through chemical leaching processes and hexane, the addition of hexane and other sort of invasive type chemicals to get down to an oil that is palatable and able to that we're able to use in cooking. And as a result, these oils, they call them frankenfoods or franken oils. Because they're created so unnaturally, and as a result, they tend to have higher levels of some of the less desirable forms of the fatty acid profile. So higher levels of omega-6 fats, which tend to be, without getting too far down that road, tend to be highly inflammatory, versus the omega-3 oils, which you might find naturally in fish or other animal fats, which are anti-inflammatory in nature. So now, whether or not you agree to the balance of O6 and O3 in your oil intake, the fact remains that a lot of these oils that are industrial seed oils, they're not really combustible, so we don't really burn them the way we might burn other fats, the way we would typically burn stored saturated fat in the human body. And so they get incorporated into the cell membranes. And because they're unnatural oils with unnatural fatty acid profiles, as they get incorporated into cell membranes, they don't work as well as the more desirable fats and oils that we want to see in this membrane of our cells. And the membrane is kind of it's the first part of a cell that any nutrient encounters on its way to making us healthier and more robust. And if by the time it gets to the cell wall or the cell membrane, and now certain hormones don't work as well that are using a lock and key system on the membrane surface, or certain nutrients can't pass as easily into the cell, or certain things can't that are waste product inside the cell can't be expelled from the cell. You want your cell membranes to be as highly functioning as possible in the way that they were designed by nature. And so by continually consuming things like industrial seed oils, the cells become, less pliable, more brittle. They become less robust, as I would say. They become more inclined to tend toward an inflammatory process. There's nothing long-term good that comes from a lifetime of consuming these industrial seed oils. I mean, a lot of people would argue that once they get rid of industrial seed oils from their diet and they start just using animal fats, butter, lard, ghee, or things like olive oil, which olives do produce oil, and avocado oil, which does produce oil, that for instance, they don't sunburn like they used to. They tan more easily because the cells are more able to interact with melanin, with cholesterol in the subsurface of the cells, and convert cholesterol to vitamin D, and all the things that we want to have happen. They require a highly functioning cell membrane. And so if the raw material that you're delivering to the cell is an inferior raw material, you're going to wind up with inferior health.
Yep. Yeah, there are a lot of those stories about the sun tolerance.
Yes.
I've heard. Yeah. What's the verdict on charred meat? That was always a discussion. Like, people loving like a charred steak and having char, and then people were like, "Oh, it's not good to eat charred things too much." And what's your opinion on this?
I don't have a strong opinion on this. I like a medium rare steak on the rare side. I don't like my steak charred that much. I guess I prefer sous vide more than anything. On the other hand, if you look at the last 750,000 years of man and the use of fire to cook food, you couldn't. There was no sous vide. That's right. There was no slow cooking in those days. So I'm not as concerned about the heterocyclic amines that people talk about, the Maillard reaction, which happens when fat, and some form of sugar, combine in a high heat environment, a la cooking with a sauce or something like that. I'm not that concerned about it. And here's one of the reasons I'm mostly not that concerned about it. I mostly eat my meat at dinner time with wine. And there was an amazing article probably 15 years ago called The Bioreactor That Is the Stomach. And so much goes on in the stomach. And so if you if you are eating a steak and yet you're also consuming, say, vegetables with that meal, and you're consuming antioxidants in the vegetables, and you're consuming antioxidants with the wine, and the wine's pH is 3.5 to 4, which is closer to the stomach pH than water is, for instance. So all of these things are sort of combining to, I think, take the scary part of, oh my God, if I'm consuming HCAs, heterocyclic amines, which are thought to be carcinogenic over time. I think people sometimes overthink that. And, the fact that heterocyclic amines are carcinogenic and that you can create them in vitro doesn't mean that consuming a nice steak with some vegetables and a glass of wine is necessarily anything other than an awesome way to eat your meal. Does that make sense?
It's a good life experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. A couple more questions before we get to your new footwear company. So I love the way you've explained this in the past, but fat burner versus sugar burner, not asking you to explain that, but in a sugar burning paradigm, when people we're on that old zone, eat, 3 meals, 2 snacks, eat every 2-3 hours, keep your insulin sensitive. I remember years like 20 years ago, when the zone diet was popular, my friend was ordering from them, and he was really fit. He was working out a lot, and he ordered their meals, and they come measure you and do your body stuff. And I remember, and this didn't make sense till much later, but I remember him saying he was eating and he said, I think I have to call them. I think they might need to do an adjustment, because I know this sounds weird, Elle, but I feel like my muscles are eating themselves. Yeah. And then I didn't make the connection until years later, the sugar burn, because that was such a sugar burning thing he was on versus fat burning. So, that whole idea of having rules and things around being a sugar burner with when you eat to prevent catabolization there versus being a fat burner and having less rules. I get, where I'm going with this.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah. No. So for the longest time, there was this thought process, and it went along with what we talked about, carbohydrate management and endurance athletics, right? And keeping your carb stores full and keeping your glycogen reserves full, because if you only derive energy from glycogen and glucose, you never get a chance to take fat out of storage and combust it. And over time, the body learns that that's the way it's going to be. My brain works on glucose. I'm going to eat every couple of hours. I'm going to get fresh supply of glucose. I'm going to refill the glycogen in the muscles. I'm going to work out. It's going to burn the glycogen first. Every time I eat, it's going to raise my insulin. So the insulin will be secreted into the bloodstream, which will then cause all of the cells to take up the glucose and take it in and store it. Well, insulin basically shuts off fat metabolism. So the higher your insulin levels are on a regular basis, the less fat you're going to burn over time. The body just is built that way. It only saves fat in some cases for what it perceives as an emergency. Well, if you eat that way, couple of hours, every couple of hours you're eating something all day long, you become really good at burning sugar and you become horrible at burning fat. And then what happens is, if you do skip a meal, the body goes, oh God, where's my glucose? I've run out of glucose. The muscles are running out of glycogen. The blood glucose is low because the insulin has taken it out of my bloodstream. So the brain says, holy crap, we're out of fuel. And it would send a message to the adrenal glands to secrete cortisol, which is a stress hormone. The cortisol will then distribute throughout the body and look for sources of amino acids that it can send to the liver to convert to glucose through gluconeogenesis. But in searching for these sources of amino acids, it goes to muscle and it says, all right, we're going to break some muscle down. That's the cannibalization, the catabolization of muscle that a sugar burner encounters every time they go and skip a meal or go on a 3-day fast or something like that. Well, the opposite of that, not the opposite, but the sort of the preferred, I think, state of human energy production is what I would call metabolic efficiency and metabolic fluidity. And that's the ability to extract energy from fat, from your fat stores, from fat from the plate of food, glycogen from your muscles, if that's where they want to get the energy from, glucose from your bloodstream, carbohydrate from your plate of food, ketones from the liver. And so what we call this ability to extract energy from whatever substrate's available, metabolic flexibility, is what really is the holy grail of any eating strategy. Once you create metabolic flexibility, it almost doesn't matter what you eat. I mean, it does, but it matters less about, because, like, for instance, you don't have to be carnivore or keto all the time to maintain metabolic flexibility. It helps to use keto as a strategy, as a tool to get there. But once you're there, you can maintain metabolic flexibility through exercise, through restricted eating. So many of the people who develop metabolic flexibility find they wake up in the morning and they're burning fat so well. They've developed this fat burning machinery that they don't feel compelled. They don't feel hungry for breakfast. And so they don't eat breakfast. We say, why eat breakfast if you're not hungry? They're so good at using ketones for fuel in the brain that they don't notice that there's not a lot of glucose in the diet over the course of a day or even over the course of weeks. The brain loves ketones, and there is no short-term heavy load requiring ketones for the brain. The brain sort of coasts along all day long in a steady state of output, regardless of what the energy requirements that the muscles are doing. In other words, you could be doing crossword puzzle or sitting at home on the telephone talking to your best friend, and the brain is going along at, say, 5 miles an hour. And then you go in the gym and you do a heavy leg day, and the legs and the muscles in the legs are using 50 times as much energy as they would, walking to the gym. But the brain's still going along at 5 miles an hour. The brain doesn't have this requirement for excess amounts of energy. Well, the body knows that. It understands that. And so the liver is able to provide just enough ketones to keep the brain happy all day long, even in the absence, I would say especially in the absence of food. So metabolic flexibility is my wish for everybody. It's what I'm trying to, it's a message I'm trying to deliver to the world, that once you develop this metabolic flexibility, things like meal planning go away. Hunger and appetite and cravings, sometimes they always dissipate, sometimes they disappear. And it's so empowering to know that you can live your life not having to think about, oh my God, I'm going to get on this flight at 10 o'clock. I'm not going to arrive till 5 p.m. and they don't serve lunch. And how am I going to survive? No, the body says, hey, this is great. We're not going to eat for a couple hours. We know how to do this. We know how to take fat out of storage, combust it. We know how to make ketones. We're going to feel better when we arrive there as a result of that. So
that's actually the story from a lot of people who become fat adapted, and then their first experience, like taking a long flight, and they're like, I didn't need snacks. My brain was on fire all day. I flew across the country. I mean, this is the kind of thing, you'd get it on Mark's Daily Apple too with the success stories. Yes. It's one of the first things you notice is how long you're able to go and be completely sustained mentally and physically.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a strategy. Is it the best way to do things? I don't know. Maybe it's a way that's a good way to do things. And I'm in France right now. I've been in Europe for the last 2 months, and I had some pasta for lunch. I split a small bowl of pasta with my wife. Don't hate me. I know where the limits are. I know. By the way, I just come off of walking for 2 hours, hard hiking for 2 hours. So it wasn't like I'm, just slovenly lifestyle here. I mean, I typically come to France every summer and spend a couple of months here, and usually I wind up losing 4 pounds while I'm in France, even though I eat very well while I'm here because I'm metabolically flexible, and I've combined the knowledge of what to eat, when to eat it, how much to eat it, and when to push the plate away, and how much work to do in the form of movement. And I'm not talking about burning calories. I'm just talking about moving, so it's an intuitive place that I've arrived at, that I get. Again, I would wish for everyone to be able to feel this confident about living one's life without worrying about losing weight or losing muscle mass or gaining weight or, getting, sickly or having your immune system compromised because of your diet, all these things that people, I think, get all up in the weeds about and get all concerned about. The ability to develop this intuitive process on a daily basis and follow through and make choices once in a while that may not serve you in the short term, but absolutely do not derail you in the long term.
Right, and provide enjoyment, like the small bowl of pasta or a piece of cake every once in a while. No one's saying never, never. It's just,
Exactly.
Before we move on to shoes, you have a couple people in your family who've gone to carnivore. That has become a thing in the past few years. I have several clients who can't eat plant matter or like welts break out on their leg. I mean, there are people that really don't seem to be able to sustain it. My question's about, even though you're not like a carnivore expert, but it seems like a lot of people at some point do introduce honey and fruit. And I guess I would ask you to maybe explain why would honey and fruit be a better choice for those people, let's say, versus plant matter or like romaine lettuces and things like that. Because that seems to be the thing that they go to. They've done meat, they've done all the fat, and then they feel like something's missing, or maybe they just want to optimize and they go to honey and fruit. Can you talk a little bit about why that?
Sure. I think first of all, we are omnivorous by design, and we have been for millions of years. So there's I think a recognition among the people who know better that yes, animal protein should represent a significant portion of your protein intake, no matter who you are and what your ethnic background is. There are a number of people who've gone to carnivore. My daughter has gone basically from being a vegetarian years ago to being a devout carnivore. She's raising her two kids. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the pictures of Kai. He's 1.5 years old. He's gnawing on a meat stick before he even had teeth. He was just sucking on meat sticks. But like you just said, I mean, I want to enjoy my life, right? I want to have enough variety in my life that I don't feel constrained by my diet or my way of eating. So personally, when I first came across and developed the Primal Blueprint, I looked at the Paleo template and I said, well, that's interesting and I get it, but what can I add? In other words, rather than being exclusionary, what are these foods that they're not adding to their Paleo program can I add because it makes sense? Dairy was an early one. I thought, I think dairy appropriate, raw milk and butter and certain artisanal cheeses, full fat, ought to be included. They were I think early days, Lauren Corday was keeping people away from saturated fat. I'm like, what are you talking about? Saturated fat should be part of what we're eating here. So I've always tried to be as inclusionary as possible. So even in my own carnivore experience, and I know I've talked to Paul Saladino about this, who was sort of the original, mouthpiece for carnivore. At some point you say, I could eat steak all day like Sean Baker, but I want more. I want some variety. I want some crunch. I want some sweetness. What can I do about that? And I think from Saladino's point of view, it's really interesting, and I do ascribe to it, and that is plants don't want to be eaten, and they have developed over the millennia, over the millions of years, certain taste profiles and toxins that make them unpalatable to a lot of people. There's a reason why young children spit out broccoli or spit out spinach or spit out, early introduction to vegetables. They're bitter. They don't taste great. And there's probably a reason for that. There's certainly a reason that humans evolved a taste, a palate that would allow them to avoid poisonous things. Because typically in nature, if something is bitter and there's a strong possibility that it's poisonous. On the other hand, if it's sweet, it's almost invariably good for you. It's almost invariably okay to eat something that is sweet. So we developed this taste bud preference for sweet things that allows us to maybe gravitate toward adding, in addition to animal protein, adding some fruits, adding some berries. And then maybe there's a little area of crossover where a romaine lettuce, isn't as bitter as, say, kale or endive or some other thing. So maybe there's a spectrum on which at the far end of some of the vegetables, you'll go, yeah, salad, he's right. Those things, they don't want to be eaten, and I don't want to eat them. And it shouldn't be that I should have to prepare them with such, with so many different methods of preparation to make them edible if they're actually good for me. Same goes for, I think, some of the bean family and some of the legume family, it's
no different than the seed oils a little bit in terms of the process of which you have to go through is so difficult. You wonder.
You wonder if you really distill it, no pun intended, down to that. You wonder, are these really good for me, or am I being, sold a bill of goods, as Saladino would say? They're emergency food. Like when there was no meat around, we could live on some of these vegetable sources. And then you look at fruit and you look at growing seasons and you look at human evolution and how humans evolved this ability to store fructose as glycogen and certainly more preferentially as body fat. And that makes total sense. The fruit ripens at the end of the season. It's sweet. We're drawn to it. We consume the fruit. We overconsume it, and we, with intent. That's why we're wired to overeat. And then the body is able to take the excess fructose, convert it into fat that we put on our bellies. And by the way, we store the fat conveniently over the center of gravity, so it's on our hips, our thighs, our belly. Because we're bipedal, we're able to carry it around with us through the sparse and spare seasons, through the winter seasons, and we can combust that stored body fat in the absence of other food. It's a beautiful, amazing, elegant system that we've developed. So back to your question, like why fruit, I'd say fruit has an evolutionary place in human nutrition and human diet. And so typically anything that is sweet, it's not that it's but the fact that it's sweet that it's good for us. It's the fact that we've developed a palate for stuff that is sweet, and it has become good for it. It is good for us because we've developed that ability to identify it. So
fascinating stuff.
I still eat my salad once in a while. I still like the crunch.
Yeah,
and I'm not gonna because Paul. By the way, I always want to get a T-shirt that says Paul salad ? I ? No.
That's right.
Pretty interesting how people's names
match right with this. Yeah.
Well,
it's funny. The other day I saw someone. She was like sold millions of books, and her name was Paige Turner.
I love it. Yes.
Just like, come on.
And you have to check and see if that's a made up name.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's let's get into shoes. So Peluva, Peluva, is your new footwear company, because you just couldn't stop after creating a
right.
multi-gajillion dollar company. Not in your nature. So, you have been a fan of minimalist footwear for so long, but how did you first come upon it? I'm assuming in your running days, you were using the fucking Nikes and all the stuff.
Yeah.
Fucking
so
Nikes what happened where you thought, let me try this,
Yeah. So one of the reasons I think that I had issues early on. So, I started running in the 60s, and all we had was Chuck Taylors and these Onitsuka Tiger shoes from Japan they were minimalist. They were minimalist shoes. They were less than a centimeter thick, and they had a very, no cushioning at all. And we were limited in the number of miles we could put in each week because our feet would tell us when it was time to stop. Not our knees, not our hips, not our lower back. Our feet would say that's enough running for the week. And typically it was 40, 45, or 50 miles. Well, along comes Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman in the 70s, and they create the waffle trainers, and they create these thick cushioned running shoes. And all of a sudden, runners like myself were able to run a lot longer distances. Now, why is that? Because it took all of the information that was supposed to be going to the bottom of the feet and bypassing it. It was cushioning it. It was, you'd step on a rock, you wouldn't even know you'd stepped on a rock. You'd step on you'd land. And by the way, it also fostered heel running. So now you could land on your heels, and you could cover more distance. When you have minimalist shoes, you're basically relegated to running on the mid part of your foot, on the balls of your feet. which is how humans actually evolved to run. We didn't. It's kind of funny. There was a book came out in the 2010 or 11 called Born to Run. It was a big bestseller, and we weren't born to run. We were born to walk and sprint. We were born to sprint, but we weren't really born to run the way people run now. But what happened was Nike and Adidas and Puma and Brooks and everybody over the years came out with these cushioned running shoes, and people started running lots and lots and lots of miles. Well, again, when you bypass
and then their knees and everything else started, the feet might have been fine.
No, the feet. So that's exactly what happened. The feet got atrophied. The feet had no say in the matter. The feet you'd bypass. First of all, you'd encase them into tight shoes. So the running shoes were always tighter. They weren't wide toe box shoes. And even if you bought like New Balance, was an innovator because they offered the first wide running shoes. Well, they were only wide at the midfoot, and then they would still taper back to the front of the foot. So you'd still be scrunching your big toe into the second toe, and the same with the small toe. And so over time, like I developed osteoarthritis. My first real injury was chondromalacia. I developed knee problems with these running shoes because when you run barefoot, or when you run appropriately as a human, and when you land on the midfoot, and when you can feel the ground underneath, by the time you weight that forward foot, by the time you produce weight on the forward foot, the brain already has thousands and thousands of bits of information on how to bend the ankle, how to flex the knee, how to torque the hip, and how to absorb the shock. And so it works completely up the kinetic chain. And so people who run barefoot, especially if they run barefoot on like uneven surfaces or forest areas with roots and things like that, land perfectly with every stride, because the information, by the time they've landed, the foot has landed, the brain knows how to flex and torque and bend everything. When you put on thick cushioned shoes, all that information is bypassed. And so all the information starts from the ankle up. And now the knee's like, which way do I bend? Do I bend sideways? Do I bend a little bit front? And same with the hips. And so over time, people develop injuries. And the irony of the modern running shoe industry is that in the 50 years since the running shoes got, high tech, there's been no decrease in running injuries, zero. Imagine, I guess it's consummate with the medical industry as well. But, and so I was always not just fascinated, I was frustrated by this, and the fact that people, should not be running as many miles as they're doing. They shouldn't be running on their heels the whole time. It's causing incredible strain on them. And so I was an early adopter of minimalist footwear in the early 2000s. And then when Vibram came out with their five-toed shoe, I was an early adopter of that, and a big fan of the concept, and a big fan of the book Born to Run. At least in terms of if you ran appropriately, right? And so it was in the back of my mind for 20 years, but I had other things to do. I was writing a blog. I was doing, developing a supplement company. I wound up developing a food company. And so when I finally sold Primal Kitchen, I thought, now I have time to turn my attention to this problem that's nagged me for 50 years. And that is, there is not a shoe that I would say optimizes for foot health. So my son, Kyle, and I set about 2.5, almost 3 years ago, we started the company. We started doing deep R&D and looked at how we could develop a shoe that optimized the foot striking of a walking human. So we haven't made a running shoe. We've made a shoe that you can run in, but we really don't encourage people to do that yet. We've made a shoe that encourages you to want to walk. And so it's got the best elements of minimalist footwear in that it is wide, it's flat, so there's zero drop from the heel to the toe. Many of the running shoes have an inch or more height of they raise the heel up, and they do this again in the name of heel cushioning and heel striking and impact for running. But we think that's been one of the issues, because what it does is it tends to shorten the calf muscle over time, which then puts strain on the plantar fascia and the Achilles. The shoes are flexible, so they're thin. So when you wear Peluvas, you can feel everything you're walking on underneath, and yet not in a bad way. It feels like it feels like your foot is getting massaged. Like I just did hour and 45 minutes, and of very uneven ground, and I looked for cobbles and I looked for rocky stuff to step on, and every time my foot landed, there's a smile on my face, thinking this is exactly the way we were meant to walk, with the foot landing differently every time, and every time the foot lands, the small muscles of the feet get a little bit stronger, they get a little bit more pliable, more resilient, the range of motion increases, and all of the things that I want to have happen are happening as a result of choosing the correct type of footwear. Now, there are a lot of companies that make minimalist shoes, but our unique selling proposition is that we make a 5-toed shoe that allows for individual articulation of the toes. So we want, every time you step on something, we want the toes to move up and down a little bit in addition to splaying outward. We want them to feel the ground surface. We want the big toe to be able to push off. And with that in mind, we've added a little bit more cushion than some of the really, really minimalist shoes. Nevertheless, the total stack height of the ones that I think you might have, Elle.
The Miami ones, I think.
Oh, yeah. So you have the Miamis, but the strands that we hike in, for the most part, the total stack height is 1 centimeter. That's 10 millimeters. That's like, a third of an inch. So you're able to feel every rock, every change in surface, every root, everything you walk on. And I'm trying to describe this in a way that resonates with people, and it feels great. It feels better.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt if you touch a pebble or something. You're like, oh my god! It's just like, oh hey, it feels like. What it's interesting is especially when you're going over rocks, the ability to like grip the toe,
grip around it.
Yeah, you're like kind of like cupping it almost.
Yes,
it feels really cool. It's an interesting new experience. And some of the people, in the paleo industry over the years who have tried your shoes, and some influencers have been totally blown away because they're like, I used to hate minimalist stuff, but these are so comfortable. I can't believe I love them. I'm walking every day in them. I also think they're good looking. I know people think the 5-finger thing, but I think your shoes are really good looking. But yeah, that feeling is so unique. You don't get that. And also the crowding. There are wide-toed shoes now, but like you talk about that big toe being pushed in. Now you're looking at bunion issues. I guess on that note, I'd say if people are listening, they're like, I have flat feet or I have a bunion. Should I try minimalist shoes? Would it correct the situation? Should I not? What are your thoughts about those things?
Yeah, depending on how severe your issues are, I would say absolutely worth a try. And if the issues are severe, work with your podiatrist or your orthopedist. But any amount of time spent in the Peluvas, I think, are going to serve you well. What I wouldn't do is I wouldn't go whole hog and spend a couple hours hiking forest trails the first day if you have had foot issues.
It takes an adjustment because
it takes an adjustment. It's like if you have never gone to the gym before, you want to take it easy and go in and lift easy the first couple of days until you get the hang of what's going to happen and how the muscles are going to be sore. But
in that sense, Mark, it kind of reminds me of because you're a stand-up paddler too. It reminds me of like when you take someone out for the first time paddling, and then the next day they're like, "My feet hurt." What?
Yes.
Because they didn't realize that they were working the feet the entire time on the board balancing because they didn't register it. They weren't feeling it until later when they were like, "Oh my god, my feet hurt so much." And that's why I think Men's Fitness actually said it was one of the best full body workouts years ago because of that sort of bottom up kind of thing. But that's sort of probably a thing people go through when they're adjusting.
That's interesting. I hadn't, I'm well aware of what you're talking about because it's the first thing that I give stand-up paddle lessons to all of my friends. And I always have to remind them, relax the feet. It's not about the feet. And their feet are trying to grip the board. They're trying to, not fall forward and not fall backward. No, do the work from the hips down, let the feet, do whatever they're going to do. You're right. That's interesting. Yeah. So I would say the other thing that, we notice is the first time people put them on, if your feet are gnarly from years of wearing narrow cramped shoes, women in particular with the high heels and all this, the stuff that don't stop wearing high heels. Yeah. They look great. But is the time it takes to put the shoes on the first couple of times. Well, that's an indication. If you can't slide these I suspect you're able to slide your Peluvas right on, right?
Yeah, now I mean, but the first one, and they are a little bit easier socks. If you've got like some sweaty feet or something, it might take a minute. But yeah, no, I got them right in there. Yeah.
No, but I have people that, the first time, like one of my neighbors, he was at my house for almost 10 minutes trying to get him on the first day. Within 2 days, he'd ordered 7 pair, and he's like, I'm going to live in these for the rest of my life, because he had gnarly feet and he was already feeling the benefits of them. But, if the fact that you can't slide them on easily the first time means that you probably need to wear something, toe spacers, you need to do some work on your feet. I think, and that gets me to this, with Primal Kitchen, my mission was to change the way the world eats, right? And I think that was basically, whether it was Primal Blueprint or Mark's Daily Apple over the years, I wanted to get people to understand the way you eat is so important to your health. And so I want to change the way the world eats. And I think with, our mission with Peluva is to change the way the world walks. I want you to understand how critical foot health is to overall health. It is your contact with the ground. You spend more time, hopefully you spend more time on your feet, than doing any other pursuit throughout the day. And if you're doing so in shoes that are painful, or if you can't feel the ground underneath, and so your balance is compromised, if you've got, some sort of inflammation or any other malady going on as a result of the footwear that you've been choosing over the years, now's the opportunity to fix that and to start to understand the benefits of minimalist footwear. And so if it's not Peluva, try someone else's. I would say minimalist footwear will work for just about everyone. And so if not Peluva, try others. But with Peluva, you do get that individual, it's a glove-like fit for your feet. It's individual articulation of the toes. And over time, we're finding, right now I've got ultra runners who are walking and hiking in Peluvas to strengthen their feet. And Tom Hodge, right? Tom? Oh, I thought Tom worked for me at around the same time we started working together. Anyway, Tom's now racing ultras across the world, and he just sent me a thing. He did 5.5 hours in his Peluvas yesterday, training for the Chamonix race, a 50K race in the mountains of Chamonix. Brad Kearns did a 9.5 hour hike, Cactus to Clouds, in his Peluvas, was passing people with thick hiking boots on. So I'm not saying that this is something you should do right out of the gates, but this is what a lot of runners are adding Peluvas to their training regimen, spending time in Peluvas. And we make them, as you know, we make leather lace-up ones for going to work, or as I like to say, going to weddings and funerals and all sorts of events. We make the Miamis, which are kind of a good-looking casual shoe. You can wear it to, out to the beach club. You can wear it out to dinner one night. And then we make the Strands, which are basically for training and for hiking. So in the gym or on the roads or on the trails. And a lot of people are saying, look, whether or not I spend my life in Peluvas, I'm going to add at least one pair to my repertoire, because I recognize that I want to work my feet the way they were intended.
Yeah. And unless you're going to be dedicated doing Pilates footwork, you got to find another way. I love that you have spent so much of your life from your personal experience. It's always like your test becomes your testimony. Same with me and thyroid. For you to the contributions you've made to the world in terms of health is unbelievable. It's because of you. And of course, I'm sure you would say, well, yes, a lot of other people around you, but that there are so many grain-free, paleo, gluten-free options out there. And the fact that now we've got a major food company who's, bought Primal Kitchen, and obviously I use all the products, the avocado oil, I saute all my vegetables in it. I use the olive oil and everything. And absolutely love the mayo, because I'm a mayo fan. I know there's people that are not into it, but when you're into it, you're into it.
Right. Right.
And now with shoes, we already talked years ago about, hey, like sitting is the new smoking, stand up, stand more. You had the sit stand workstation. You even had the cobblestone, little mat. But
that's right. You remember that?
To work
your
your feet.
Great.
Yeah. And I remember
that
being like, well,
that whack job.
Now
that
the shoes, you're taking it a step level. So
amazing. So we're this sort of what we're saying this year is foot health is the new sleep.
There you go.
Yeah.
I love it. Mark Sisson, wonderful as always. Thank you so much for everything you brought into my life, including just not only you and your family, but really the change in my life. I'm a paleo success story myself. And even though, like you, occasional little bite here and there, it's changed my life, my health. And I implore everyone listening to look into Peluva, go to peluva.com. You can use code L for 10% off. And try a pair.
ELLE,
try it.
not just
L. That's right. ELLE, not just the letter L. And peluva.com, really cool stuff.
One more thing I want to add.
Yeah.
And I want to add that a lot of people, when I finish these podcasts, people ask, like, how do I, like, I'd love to know what you know, and how do I get some of that understanding? And so I do want to point people also to another thing that we do, and that's the Primal Health Coach Institute.
Yes.
Right.
I'm a Primal Health Coach, so let's get in there.
You're a Primal Health Coach. And I think, a lot of people in this day and age are looking to make a contribution to other people's lives. And, how can I get involved in the health world in a way that is that resonates with what I believe and what I know to be true about myself and certainly my experiences. And so the Primal Health Coach Institute is a way that people who are maybe interested in either just getting the knowledge, because I created that so that I could pass what's in my brain on to other people. Or
there are people that have taken it that just take it for the knowledge for themselves and their family. My brother's one of those people who took the course, who was like, I just want to learn it. And he's not a Primal Health Coach. I know so many people, there's friends of mine who don't use it as a business, but they wanted that knowledge. And it is really fascinating and interesting. It's like reading a really fascinating documentary.
Yeah. Thank you. And people, so there are a lot of people who become coaches, and I love that people want to start their own business. Recently, we've really delved into an enterprise solution here where we're looking at encouraging businesses to take on health coaches for their, as part of their HR department, or encouraging physicians' offices to train some of their physician assistants or nurses to be able to spend more time with a patient at the end of a 7-minute session. Hey, Elle, I looked at your blood work and it looks fine, but you need to eat better and you need to exercise more, right? So what does that look like? So anyway, so I just want to put it out there that the Primal Health Coach Institute, if you're interested, it's an amazing learning opportunity for people.
I love it. Go to peluva.com, everyone. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. And for everyone else, we'll see you next week. Hey, listeners. Over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products. And I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.